Well, that was unexpected. When chapter 377 came to an end, we thought we'd finally get an explanation for how Rakshas managed to survive being shot with an RPG at point-blank range, and then get a little bit of Berserk action while we were at it. Instead, the kurultai is in lockdown. Rakshas has every able-bodied warrior engaged in a fight, and Guts is, well, he's still convalescing in a prison cell. But we don't even know if we can call it that anymore. The rest of the gang is preparing for an impromptu invasion. Schierke still isn't back to help fortify their magical defenses, and the best warrior sweating it out like he's withdrawing from a ginormous cocktail of drugs. This division is fertile ground for destructive activities, and we hate to say it, but that's where the Kushan Empire seems to be headed. But what does it all mean? Well, we'll explain all that and more in this video. This is Berserk chapter 378 explained. The resurrection of an apostle, Rakshas' unexpected return. In our chapter 377 breakdown, we speculated that Rakshas' return occurred after a tactical retreat. He'd been blown out of the sky by Rickard in chapter 341, and the last time we saw him, his flaming body was about to crash into a building in Falconia. Now, Rakshas isn't your regular apostle. He's one of Qliphoth's war demon commanders, leading his search and destroy unit with a sense of pleasure that will leave many of us regular folk disturbed as hell. He should have had the resilience to tank that missile, but turns out, hell is where Rakshas was hanging out all this time, because he didn't survive the blast. He died because of it. Chapter 378 opens with Daiba screaming at the kurultai leaders to take cover and get away from the northern clan leader, because evil had arrived at their doorstep in the most unexpected way. The northern clan leader wasn't even in Falconia when Daiba and Slan escaped, but we figured Rakshas' shadow traveled all the way back to his homeland. Turns out he didn't, because he didn't even know that he was in the Kushan capital. His first thoughts in this chapter are about his location, and he wonders how he came to be surrounded by so many Kushan, because his last memory is of dying in Falconia. Rakshas is confused by the fact that he isn't in the Falcon City, and seeing all these brown faces in front of him, including Slat's, he's left speechless, which is a first for him. Slat is laser focused on dealing with the issue at hand as always. He immediately gets the new Kushan Emperor out of the kurultai chamber and helps protect the rest with his Bakiraka assassins, who were disguised as servants for the assembly. Roderick is impressed with the Bakiraka prince's preparations, but he has little to no opportunity to express it to him. This makes a lot of sense considering that they had an invasion to deal with, but it feels like Slat is operating off a feeling that goes deeper than that. The moment he spots Rakshas, he screams and goes to engage him, because in his mind they still had a score to settle. Rakshas betrayed the clan, did everything they stood against, and moreover, their brief scuffle in Falconia was just a draw. There's nothing in this world that Slat would like to do more than avenging that disrespect, but his priorities are split between vengeance and duty. His disguised protectors get a decent head start on the battle. They swarm Rakshas and break his attack claws with an ease that seems to surprise him, but he's still disoriented from his resurrection, and he's putting things together as he's fighting his people. Daiba warns everyone not to underestimate him just because they had the numbers advantage, but by the end of the chapter, Slat doesn't care about any of that. He leaps at Rakshas, intent on stopping his schemes once and for all, but he might live to regret that decision. For all his lies and deception, Daiba isn't wrong when he says dealing with an apostle is a tricky thing, and that's even more evident against a guy like Rakshas. But what we can't figure out is how he came back to life. Usually when an apostle dies, their physical body remains on the physical plane, while their astral bodies are sucked into the abyss. We've seen it happen with Slug Count. We've seen it happen with Wild. Once your soul is in that infernal vortex, there's nothing you can do to save it, and resurrection is completely out of the question. So how did Rakshas come back from the dead? Well, there are two possible explanations. The first is that the death of apostles has become impossible ever since the physical and astral worlds merged. Qliphoth used the abyss as a basis for the great roar of the astral world. He's put evil on the front lines, at center stage, and in doing so, he's ensured he never loses his most valuable assets. If the vortex of souls has been configured in such a way that only human souls can enter it now, then no matter how many apostles our heroes try to kill, they'll always come back. Hell spilling over into the world will have much more literal meaning then, and honestly, we wouldn't be surprised if this is actually the case. But the second possibility, which is more likely, is that Rakshas was brought back by someone for a very specific kind of mission. He acknowledged his death shortly after regaining consciousness, and wondered how it was that he was alive again. And not just that, thousands of miles away from home. Rakshas had no idea he was in the Kushan Empire, until he looked around the room. He died without getting a chance to kill Qliphoth, so you can say his desire was so great that his return was inevitable. But that doesn't make any sense, right? If every apostle died before they achieved their goals and got resurrected till they achieved it, the world would be overrun by them. No, we think Rakshas' resurrection is a one-off deal, and it happened because he still hasn't played his part in Casualty's grand plan. The God Hand pretty much controls the vortex of souls, so it's not a stretch to think that they have some sort of jurisdiction over who stays within it and who gets to leave. On account of Rakshas not fulfilling his purpose, he's been given a small respite, because when he dies for good, he's going back in there anyway. So a God Hand has to be involved in his return, whether we like it or not. The last time we see him in this chapter, he's fighting the young master in what should be a battle for the ages, but we suspect that Studio Gaga has already given us the answer we've been looking for by sending Rakshas reinforcements. Not that he'd need them, mind you. The real form of evil spirits, Qliphoth's return, and the new trolls of Berserk. At one point in his fight with the Kushan, Rakshas grabs his head and lets out a terrifying primal scream that pushes everyone in his vicinity to the walls behind them. For those uninitiated, in the ways of magic, this must have felt like a war cry meant to intimidate them. We remember when Guts was fighting Wild, and the ape apostle's screams made his bones rattle. It's a decent enough tactic to disorient your enemies so you can close in for the kill, but that's just it. Rakshas doesn't. His scream doesn't scare off all the assailants around him, but it was done with the intention of creating space. As soon as he does it, an interstitial tornado descends upon the royal palace, which is reminiscent of the one that swallowed Slugcount's castle and the site of Griffith's eclipse. For the second time in the manga, we see Daiba holding his head in disbelief, because he knows that the astral gates are opening, and that a mere apostle doesn't have that kind of power. He knows that the only entity that can do such a thing is a God Hand member, but that is left unsaid as the manga's perspective exits the royal palace. The common folk were going about their day in a leisurely manner until they saw the weird weather in the city. As they stared at the astral tornado, the cobblestone streets of the Kushan capital started leaking blood, and from that blood emerged a pack of bloodthirsty monsters. These monsters slaughtered every living thing in sight, and for a brief moment, Berserk recovered its reputation for gore and glory. If Farnese hadn't told us that these monsters are actually trolls, we'd have never guessed, because they look nothing like the trolls that attacked Enoch Village. Those trolls looked like hairy little monkeys with weird tendrils for facial hair. These trolls are all muscle, furless, with manes black as night and ears that make them look like goblins. The Kushan trolls feel almost primordial in a way, like they were the original template for trolls, but it's equally possible that these Kushan trolls are the new and evolved ones. Farnese doesn't exactly waste a lot of time determining which is which, because with Schierke still out cold, she was the last line of magical defense. In the previous chapter, she set out to free Guts as soon as she sensed a major disturbance in the odd of her surroundings. But on her way to his cell, the trolls cornered her. Farnese might be a lot braver than she used to be even 50 chapters ago, but she still isn't a combatant. She pretty much froze in place upon seeing the monsters, and if Serpico wasn't following her like a shadow, she might have died like the Kushan citizens outside the palace. As soon as they've dealt with their immediate problem, the two of them run toward the core of the evil energy permeating the Kushan capital, because Farnese was now the last line of defense. With Schierke out cold, she took it upon herself to deal with this problem, but it might just be out of her area of expertise, because what's descending upon the Kushan capital isn't a mere interstice, it's the astral domain of darkness, Qliphoth. Farnese is sure of it because she was trapped in Qliphoth once, and the feeling that this malign odd was giving her was exactly the same as that time. Serpico was confused as to why Qliphoth would manifest within the castle, but they had no time to waste. As of this moment, the Kushan trolls have all our protagonists surrounded, and they've even killed a bunch of Silat's soldiers in the kurultai chamber. The good guys are determined to defend themselves, but if what Daiba is thinking is true, then there's really no point in trying. As the world's primary authority on dark magic, he knows that all these demon spawn can only gather in one place if their creator was nearby, and we all know what that person is. She once called Qliphoth her womb, so we're pretty excited to see Slan return to the series, because that's the only possible explanation for everything that's going on. She's been obsessed with Guts since day one, and thanks to the Great Roar, she finally has a chance to tempt him to the dark side using a direct approach. Qliphoth is Slan's domain within the astral world, so assuming that she's behind all this, including Rakshas' resurrection, isn't that big of a stretch. Plus, being a God Hand member, she's the only one who'd have the power to do something like this. Right now, Guts' allies are scattered and doing their best to make good of an impossible situation. Rickard is protecting Farnese's brother in the streets. Morda is watching over Schierke in her room. Isidro and Puck have picked up on the situation at hand, and the mages of Elfhelm are doing their best to stand their ground. If trolls weren't enough of a bother following an apostle sneak attack, the magical beasts that the Kushan were preparing to fight Griffith's army also start going berserk on them. The reason for this is probably the fact that the creation of magical beasts involves spirit possession of the worst kind. Daiba's Pisacha were animals in body, but they were possessed by the spirits of his Harashara, who themselves channeled the power of evil to make his Pisacha as strong as they were. If he kept that same formula for his new Pisacha Gana, it makes sense that they'd fall under the control of an actual embodiment of evil, like Slan. In the final 2 pages of chapter 378, we see Rakshas mutter to himself that this will do. As he says this, he attacks Dilat, whose men are reeling from the combined force of trolls and Pisacha. The final shot of the chapter shows Guts still stuck in his cell and looking closer to death rather than being pumped for a fight. At the end of the previous chapter, he nearly regained consciousness when he felt his brand of sacrifice bleed, because he knew it meant an apostle was nearby. But now, the entire realm of darkness descends upon him, and all he can do is hope that the panic sweats break off at some point. Guts is as dazed as he was before he clocked Rakshas' presence, and this is far from being a good sign. The way that Farni's internal thoughts are structured in this chapter and the previous one, it makes us think that the problem and the solution are one and the same, that being Guts himself. We've seen his brand of sacrifice attract dead spirits and many other infernal entities, but opening a portal to Qliphoth is entirely new. We're not sure if he's the one who did it in the first place, but when Farni said that she knows where the heart of the issue is, she rushes off in a direction that doesn't seem to be headed to the kurultai chamber. If that is indeed the case, then it's entirely possible that Guts is the reason the Kushan lands are in trouble, and he's probably going to end up becoming their salvation as well. These trolls are far more ravenous than their predecessors, choosing to kill and devour their targets on the spot, instead of playing with them and carrying off their women. Rakshas is back and stronger than ever. Elephants are rampaging across the capital, and the only thing that can keep all of this in check is Guts swinging his Dragon Slayer around once again. If he fails to do that, then it will be up to his comrades to navigate them out of this hairy situation, and we doubt they'd succeed. As things stand right now, the good guys need to get their crap together, or a miracle of God to save them. We cannot know if either of those options will save them from what's coming, but we can certainly hope, because right now, that's all we got. Marvelous verdict, and that's it for our dissection of chapter 378. Things are finally ramping up toward the endgame that Miura-sensei planned decades ago for his series, and we must say that we're glad Studio Gaga and Koji Mori decided to see things through. The Eastern Exile arc has quickly become one of the most tense phases in the manga's history, and if we're right about anything we've said in this video, then it will quickly end in one of two ways. Either Guts will give in to his desire for power and lose himself to the tidal wave of evil, or he will steel himself like he always has, and power through the task of killing his first god hand. We're sitting ducks until we get any more information on the next chapter's release, so why don't you guys let us know your thoughts down in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Marvelous Anime for more Berserk content, and always remember to keep struggling, strugglers.